what is, I mean, I know, but what is neoliberalism? Because I think that that is one of those words that gets thrown around a lot and just conflated with liberal conservative. Oh, you're a neolib or you're this. And yeah, sometimes it is correct. But would you just explain, like, when you're saying neoliberal, what we're talking about?
Neoliberalism is an economic and political philosophy that was developed in the 40s by a group of economists in Europe. There was one American, Milton Friedman, among the bunch. In Europe, the word liberal means what we would call libertarian here, or conservative economics, laissez-faire, hands-off economics, small government. And these guys wanted to one-up that. And so they became the new liberals, the neoliberals. They were trying to they were trying to come up with a system that would make sure that there was no repeat of the rise of fascism in Europe, Spain, Italy, Germany, flipping fascist, or the rise of communism. They were trying to prevent either of those things from happening. And being economists, they thought they could do it through economics. And so the core principles of neoliberalism are that anything that distorts the marketplace is bad, like labor unions, which distort the marketplace in their opinion. Regulation, they're big fans of deregulation. Any kind of government basically doing anything other than running courts, the police, and the army is bad. So all government functions should be privatized. The market itself should be making the rules by which it operates, because it's the most informed player in the marketplace. And so ultimately markets should even run democracies, which is a little crazy. That's like saying that the NFL should stop regulating football, and instead whichever team won the most games last year gets to decide how many players they have on the field this year, versus other teams. But, that was their theory. And out of that then comes the idea that the players that are the most successful in this competition, this Darwinian process of figuring out who's the smartest capitalist, the billionaires and the giant corporations, that they shouldn't have to pay taxes, because that inhibits their ability to keep the economy going with these job creators, And also finally that monopolies and inequality are not bad things, that these are actually signs that the economy is working properly, because the winners are actually winning.
Okay. And the one thing that I kept noticing, well, two key things. One is when we hear liberal, we tend to think left and Democrat, but the reality is this is a nonpartisan thing that's been going on. This is an economic movement that really is, beyond the party system. And then the other thing is how it intersects with capitalism. Because I feel like, you can have, to some extent, some capitalism, but when you add in the neoliberal policy to it, it's just run amok.
And that's a critical point, Jen. That's like probably the most critical point. Capitalism is nothing more than a game, just like football. And if you don't have rules for the game that not only allow the game to perpetuate itself, but allow the players of the game to feel like they have, a fair shot at the game, and allow the spectators to the game, the more peripheral participants, to get what they need out of the game. Just like with football, like the metaphor I used just a second ago, it doesn't work. And this is what's happened. I mean, neoliberalism, you could argue, is simply a wildly deregulated capitalism. It brings you, as we've seen through the examples of Chile, Iraq, Russia, and the United States now, it brings you the world that Charles Dickens wrote about. That was basically a neoliberal time. When you had a 1% top 1%, you had about a 4 or 5% middle class, which was doctors, lawyers, shopkeepers. Scrooge in A Christmas Carol was a small businessman. He was the middle class. And then you got the 95% of the working poor. That's what you get with neoliberalism. That's what you get with unregulated capitalism. And that was the big innovation that FDR brought into the fore. And frankly, Lincoln had earlier on, which is a whole kind of another history, which is heavily regulating capitalism can make it work, just like heavily regulating football. The NFL has got a huge rule book. And if you play by the rules, then the game works for both teams, and it works for the spectators, and it works for the survival of the game itself, of the sport. But rigging capitalism so that only the morbidly rich and the giant corporations can really play in the game, and they're the only ones who ever win, is not a prescription for long-term success or even viability, as Peter was pointing out. The mother of all crashes. it could be coming, and if it does, it will largely be the result of 42 years of neoliberal policy.
Yeah.
What do you foresee happening over, I mean, obviously everyone just focuses on the next election and what's going to happen, but people are really hurting right now. And we saw what happened 8 years ago with Flint, Michigan. Now we're seeing it with Jackson, Mississippi. I mean, when we think about the type of changes that we need to see in our country, it's coming to the surface, and there's not enough holes that you can plug at this point. They're just going to keep popping up everywhere. And I'm wondering, do you think it's going to all happen at once, that everything is going to crash? Or do you think that this is sort of like a slow burn where this will go and that will go, and then eventually there'll be a consensus of sorts amongst the populace? But I think if you're really paying attention to what's going on right now, especially with the impending railroad strike, I mean, you really have to be blind at this point not to see that the system's failing, and it's failing badly.
Yeah, and your second point is really what's been going on in a bigger way for the last decade or two, and that is that the system's coming unraveled. We have seen since 1980 the American middle class go from 65% of us to 45% of us today, and the 45% who are still in the middle class really can't do that with a single paycheck like they could in 1980, and in many cases they're hanging on by the fingernails through debt, mostly credit card debt, student debt, mortgage debt. We have seen a $50 trillion transfer of wealth since 1980 from the bottom 95% of Americans to the top of 1% of Americans. We have now the greatest concentration of wealth on the planet in the smallest number of hands. We have 3 men who own more wealth than the bottom half of America. I mean, this is out of control. This is basically what's happened over the last 40 years, but in particular the last 20 years, and it's really gone on steroids in the last 10 years since Citizens United legalized political bribery, is oligarchy, is rule by the rich. And this is why Congress hasn't successfully passed any kind of legislation in at least 20 years whose principal beneficiaries are the average working person versus giant corporations or billionaires. Because the giant corporations and billionaires now own the entire Republican Party and enough of the Democratic Party that they can block anything from happening.
One of the things that you covered really well about neoliberalism historically is that it hasn't worked. And the couple of good examples, like you said, Chile and Iraq, like there's examples where we can see that. But I also thought it was interesting when you talked about how it either can breed this oligarchy and or this fascist authoritarianism. And like we're seeing in Russia kind of both. And here right now, we've got the oligarchy, the fascism is moving faster in that direction. But it's amazing that both of those things come from this.
Yeah, it's a really important point. And I covered that aspect of it in this book in brief, because I had covered it at some detail in an earlier book, The Hidden History of American Oligarchy. But oligarchy is a very unstable system. It typically only lasts 1 or 2 generations. Rule by the rich is, eventually what happens is the people get pissed off and one of 2 things happens. Either a strongman autocrat emerges like Vladimir Putin did in Russia and like Nouri al-Maliki did in Iraq and turns the nation into a fascist state, or the people rise up, overthrow the oligarchy essentially, whether it was the French Revolution, the American Revolution, or what's going on right now in both Russia and the United States, and flip the nation back into democracy. Oligarchies typically don't last a long period of time. So we're in a transitional phase right now.
So can you estimate how much longer we're going to be in this transitional phase?
I'd be astonished if there's not some clear resolution of this within the next 5 years.
Thanks for watching. If you want to support our mission to transform politics into service, please like this video, subscribe, follow us on social media, and consider joining our Patreon, where you'll get early access to our interviews as well as other exclusive content. Links are in the description. Peace out.